Tonight's event, the launch of Shellie McMurdo's Blood on the Lens, Trauma and Anxiety in American Found Footage Horror Cinema. Very excited for this one. Shellie, as you know, is the other co-convener of this Horror Studies SIG, and we're all very excited for her and very excited to read this book. And I have had a little preview. I haven't got through it yet, but I've very much enjoyed so far. I'm going to hand over to our fantastic speaker, fantastic chair, Kendall Phillips, who is Professor of Communication and Rhetorical Studies at Syracuse University, with courtesy appointments also at Shanghai University and Massey University in New Zealand. And Kendall is the author of several books on horror, including, of course, Projected Fears, Horror Films and American Culture, Dark Directions, Romero, Craven, Carpenter and the Modern Horror Film, and A Place of Darkness, The Rhetoric of Horror in Early American Cinema. Kendall, I'm going to hand over to you. Take it away.
Oh, Laura, thank you so much. A deep honor and privilege to be able to virtually cross the pond and spend some time with you and with this really amazing book. Thrilled to be in conversation with a good friend and an excellent scholar. So please allow me to do the honor of introducing Dr. Shellie McMurdo. Shellie, are you? There. Look,
okay.
There. And she appeared. Shellie is a lecturer in film and television theory and practice in the School of Creative Arts. In both the BA and MA programs. She completed her PhD on found footage at Roehampton University and taught there previous to joining the School of Creative Arts. She has published widely and presented on horror media and film, television, and podcasting, also about trauma and cinema, special effects, makeup, and true crime fandom, in addition to the amazing Blood on the Lens, Trauma and Anxiety in American Found Footage Horror Cinema from Edinburgh University Press. She also has a forthcoming monograph that I think surely is just about out from the Auteur series, the Devil Advocate series on Pet Cemetery. Shellie, welcome to this amazing event.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. I was looking through the list of people in the audience and lots of friends and colleagues and people that without them, this book wouldn't have happened. So that's lovely.
No, it's a great book, and I'm sure a lot of folks have already read it, and we'll have lots of deep questions. But I did want to start, Shellie, if I could, ask you about what led you to found footage of all the various genres and subgenres within the wider field of horror and trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Why found footage? What spoke to you about that?
I think it all goes back. I mean, I was growing up in the UK and the age that I was, Ghost Watch on television. I remember that being a thing when I was, I think I would have been 8 years old when that came out. I remember sitting there and screaming at my dad to turn the TV off because I thought the ghosts were going to come through the TV cables and get me. But really, I think it was the Blair Witch Project. I was about 14, 15 when it came out. And I thought I was one of those people that thought it was real, probably because, you know, the internet then wasn't the internet like we have now. And there was no way of kind of checking or fact checking that the people in it weren't actually dead. And I remember, I think I got it through quite illicit means when it was still in the cinema, which probably made it a little bit better because watching it on kind of a very fuzzy copy of a copy probably made it even better. But I remember sitting in my childhood bedroom watching it and just thinking, I just watched 3 people die. You're not meant to watch this. Oh, there's something about this that you're not meant to see, that you're not meant to witness or experience. And I loved it. I was obsessed with it and was always kind of surprised that it didn't kind of take off in a big way. The found footage kind of format didn't, or if it did, it was kind of not known to me at that age. But just always came back to, that was the film that scared me. That was the film that really made me feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't watch horror films anymore, because that really affected me. And I think that was it. And then after Paranormal Activity, you know, you get tons more of it. I mean, in the in-between kind of time you do as well. And I just started to notice that most of my favorite films were found footage horror films. And there was just something about them that I just loved. Because I mean, this book grew out of my PhD research, and I think both of my PhD supervisors are here tonight, which is Stacey Abbott and Ian Robert Smith. And originally, my Viva examiners are here too, I think, and I want to say thank you to them, Lindsay Hallam and Deborah Jermyn, particularly because Deborah, horror's not her thing. And I was very proud of the fact that when I did my Viva, she said it's the only thesis I've ever had to ban from bedtime reading because it was too scary. And that's a badge of honor. Like, I was always really, really proud of that. But Marble Hornets was on YouTube. And that was really the thing that kind of got me back into thinking about it in a kind of academic way. Because I loved the Marble Hornet series and how it was kind of transmedial and spread across all these different kind of places. And originally I approached Stacey and Ian at Roehampton and said, oh, I want to do my thesis on Marble Hornets and Slender Man. And then that kind of dropped off and it became, oh, this is going to be a project about found footage horror. So I think partly the Blair Witch Project and partly Marble Hornets. That was kind of my two things that I just adored, and I just wanted to explore them more and write about them.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful book, and it's interesting, when you say that, because I was a bit older, so I remember Blair Witch coming. I saw Blair Witch in Ithaca, New York, which is where Cornell University, the big Ivy League school, auditorium absolutely packed with these very bright Cornell students. All of them believed it was real. All of them walked out saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe that happened." I was the one person I think who knew it was not real and had that ethical dilemma of, do I tell them or do I not? I decided, no, screw them. They'll figure it out later. They're all smart. But it's interesting that in spite of the impact that Blair Witch had, and it was absolutely electric in the United States, it was, and globally, as you point out in the book, there's actually relatively little attention to found footage as a broader genre, not to discount everything, but it's not had the sort of sustained attention that we have with a lot of other subgenres that, in fairness, are not quite as popular. So why do you think horror scholars have kind of not dived as deeply into found footage as you have here?
I think it was partially, I think, you had the Blair Witch Project, and then there is a great many like brilliant films in between Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity. I think maybe because it was very popular, and I know I have a tendency, and I think other people might admit they have a tendency to, if something is very, very popular, you kind of, as someone who writes about horror films, I think you want to find those little kind of hidden gems and hidden kind of cycles and directors and kind of bring them into the light. So I think found footage horror's popularity kind of worked against it in a lot of ways, that maybe people thought, well, someone else is going to write about this, or this is just, it's very samey, or this is just a bit too popular. Possibly that had something to do with it. But I mean, hopefully in the book I kind of draw some of the lesser known stuff out.
And you definitely do. And it's an encyclopedia. Beyond being brilliant analysis, it's an encyclopedia for folks who maybe only know Blair Witch, Paranormal, maybe have a couple of the others, Rec or things. You do a fabulous job of drawing all these together. I wonder if the other thing, and I think your book does a fabulous job of dispelling this other kind of preconception, is, I will say, when I was writing a little book about history of horror, I was thinking about Blair Witch. I was also thinking about The Sixth Sense. I ended up writing about The Sixth Sense partly because it came out earlier, but also because at the time there was a feeling that Blair Witch was kind of a gimmick. Like, it was a good movie and it had a big impact, but it was kind of especially in the, just a year or two after that film came out, when I was writing, it felt like, oh, okay, you pulled that off. A little like Ghostwatch. Like, okay, you got us.
Yeah,
that's not going to work again. Like, okay, we've seen that trick. And you do such a fabulous job of getting us past the gimmick. So I'm wondering, for you, do you think maybe the gimmick aspect, or the sense that this is just like a filmmaking trick, is another reason people don't move beyond that surface?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of reviews, in the interim between Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity, but even after more recent films, like, it's a one-trick pony, it's just a kind of flashy gimmick, it's not going to work again. And I think, like, you're absolutely right, because I remember reading your book when I was doing my research, and I went, oh, but it was when I was still quite sort of young in academia, and I kind of thought, oh, why didn't Kendall write about the Blair Witch Project? And it's like, well, it come out, your book come out then, and how are you gonna know. And I think it's weird though, because now I feel like films have kind of, the Sixth Sense, that kind of horror has kind of come back up as well, which is interesting. I guess it's all about kind of cycles and things coming back up and stuff like that. But I think definitely, I mean, most of the critiques that you read of found footage will say a variation of, well, it's a one-time thing. It's like, well, who are they trying to fool? The interesting thing, one film that I think is really interesting is the Upper footage. But I think when it was actually released, it was just called Upper. But that was publicized just through a couple of very, very short YouTube videos of people at a party and their faces are pixelated and they're taking drugs at a party. And it was never said, oh, this is real or this is fake. They were just kind of dropped on YouTube. And there was a lot of debate over, oh, who are these people? Oh, someone died at this party. Da, da, da. And it was only when I think people started to theorize who was in the video, and I think the director Justin Cole thought he might be in trouble with the Disney Channel, because there was a lot of, oh, is it, I think her name was Chelsea Kane, who's a Disney actress, oh, maybe it's her. And then he did this kind of this article, I think it was in Bloody Disgusting, where he said, okay, guys, turns out yeah, that's fake, guys. I don't want to be sued, so that is very, very fake. But I think that's interesting that even in this kind of age, I mean, this was a good 10 years ago now, but even in this age now of kind of information saturation, there's still the possibility of things being fake. And I think it's interesting how different things being real, sorry. And I think it's interesting how different directors have kind of, as we've got different social media apps, different user generated content sites, how they've been used in the same way, but differently to the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, it's interesting at the end of the book, not to give no spoilers here, but at the conclusion of your book, you do talk a little bit about this kind of interesting phenomenon now where you're getting chunks of found footage circulating in social media in ways that are decontextualized and therefore not clearly fictional. So the example that you talk about that I kind of was watching happen here in the States, at least, was the clip from Megan is Missing, which is a quite disturbing little found footage film that was circulating in TikTok, often framed as a, oh my God, this is what happens if you talk to strangers. And so you get that continuing blurring of that line between reality and fiction on social media that we got on Ghost Watch on television or in Blair Witch when it happened in the films. So I did want to ask at least one of the question, and probably this is a question I should be able to answer since I am evidently an American, but it does seem to me at least that found footage has a pretty deep connection to America. I mean, there's a lot of examples. So I know people can throw up, Wreck, or they can throw up My Little Eye, or any number, The Medium, a recent found footage film. But it does seem like a lot of found footage centers in the American context. Is there a kind of connection between American culture and found footage for you?
For me, there is. I think, I mean, one of the other reasons that kind of drew me to found footage horror was 9/11. And I think I was at college when 9/11 happened, and it was, for a lot of people of my generation, not everybody, but probably one of the most traumatic world events of our kind of teenagehood, childhood. And I remember, being fixed to the TV when everything was unfolding on the news, and it was the bystander footage for me. That's the first time that I had ever seen a world event through the lens of normal people, not through news crews rushing to I mean, you had that too, but it was the first time I had ever felt like I was in that event myself and kind of immersed in it. And I think that drew me towards it as well. I remember Cloverfield, when that came out, the parallels, but I know it's very easy to say horror films after 9/11 are about 9/11, and I don't want to I'm not saying that, but Cloverfield in particular was, you can't, to quote Adam Lowenstein, who's one of my academic heroes, you can't watch Cloverfield and not think of 9/11. So I think that was definitely something else that drew me to it. And I think there's lots of different examples that we can, like you say, Wreck and My Little Eye, which totally underrated movie. I love My Little Eye, especially like Chris Lemche is just, yes. but other stuff, you know, you've got from Britain, you've got Exhibit A, and what's the one from South Korea, Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. Lots of different, but it does seem to be there's a particular American fascination with, and maybe it's witnessing, maybe it's I don't know, like witnessing or kind of capturing events as they happen, maybe because of the impact of 9/11 and other things that have happened after of this. And I think it's a British thing as well, this kind of, you know, whip your phone out and start recording something that I don't know. I mean, I can't know because I'm not part of different cultures there, but I don't know if it's quite as strong as it is for British and American people to record things.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a sense, my sense is that America has a kind of deeply mediated experience of the world anyway. Maybe it's just because of our media saturation or the scope of the country and the size, et cetera. So we do seem to experience most of our world through mediation, and then found footage just kind of filters right into the same approach. But I do want to ask about the book itself. So again, book is absolutely fabulous. I think you do an amazing job of moving between kind of talking about broad trends in found footage and then drilling into particular films. So I always like to ask this question of people who've written a book. Is there a chapter that didn't make it? Is there an example, a film that you'd written about or thought about, you thought, boy, this is great, and you just thought when it got to it, it just didn't make the cut or didn't quite fit in? Could you tell us what didn't make it into this?
I think when you read the conclusion, I think it's clear that I really wanted to talk about Savage Land more. And I just sort of slotted it in at the end because Savage Land is amazing. I mean, all my kind of favorites I got in there. So I got The Sacrament is my favorite film, the Poughkeepsie tapes, stuff like that. I wish, and I was really lucky actually, because when I was writing the book, Spree come out, and I just adored Spree and managed to clip other bits down and put Spree in there. I wish that, I mean, the focus of the book ended up being very much, it was never the original intention to have it kind of North American focused, but that kind of just ended up being what happened. I wish there had been room to look at different countries' output of found footage horror, but I guess, I mean, that's something that someone can kind of use that as the basis from it and go from there, which would be fantastic. Ones that I really wish I'd have got in, yeah, like, I mean, we've got Aislinn Clarke here tonight. I wish The Devil's Doorway had made it into there. I wish Host had been in there a little bit more. But Grave Encounters 2, that's the one that I wish was in there. I love Grave Encounters 2. So a very, very good sequel. I wish there had just been a little bit of room at the end of the reality television chapter to put that in, to fit that in. But yeah, that's the one that I kind of really regret.
Well, you can follow my path, which is every book I've written has just been guilt out of the failure of the previous book. So then I had to write the next book, and then that one failed, so I had to write the next one. I always say if I ever write a good book, I will stop. Fortunately, for me at least, that will never happen. But I am curious about like the other direction. I guess, you know, clearly there's this kind of broader global uptake that you can consider, lots of other examples in each of these categories. But the other that you sort of gesture to is the movement of found footage out of media, you know, television or film media into other media. So I wonder if you could talk a little more about the way found footage as a kind of category is finding its way into particularly audio and podcast and radio, and what that says about found footage as a genre.
Yeah, I mean, again, in the conclusion, another one, I forgot about it when we were just with the last question, but Video Palace. If anyone hasn't listened to Video Palace, it's truly one of the best narrative podcasts I've ever listened to, and it was described as found footage audio, which is interesting. And there's a lot of, I think the way that found footage horror has kind of split its tendrils into different things is it's taking some of the base kind of characteristics of it and then adapting it. So with Video Palace, there's a lot of audio that is imperfect. It's kind of marred by distortion, or the quality's not very good. And, you know, you can look back at the Blair Witch Project and say, you know, the quality of some of these shots isn't very good, or with more recent stuff like the VHS films, they're kind of marred by static. and a lot of, in Video Palace, you get a lot of static noises, which I think is really interesting. And the way Video Palace uses that is to kind of mark the presence of the monster. I'm being really careful not to say too much in case people want to listen to it, but it kind of, yeah, when the monster is near, then you get this kind of static noises and stuff. And also games. Like, I love how the found footage format has gone into games. So Outlast is a great game. It was a Resident Evil game that kind of had it as well, but again, kind of using the kind of very basic characteristics of found footage horror. So in a lot of these games, what I love is how it's using the limitations of the frame and having bits where you can't move. And it's the same feeling as when you're watching a found footage horror film, you're like, just move the camera that way. So yeah, I think it's I mean, with found footage horror, I think it's, although we kind of say, you know, oh, it's shaky cameras and it's this and it's that, it is, but it also is not. It doesn't have a loyalty. It has a loyalty to a kind of feel, but not a specific look. And I think that's what's allowed it to kind of cross different medias and different like media formats. I think that's kind of key to its longevity as well.
Yeah, and it's certainly, and it's interesting that, you know, and I guess maybe another thing we could think of together about is the kind of history of found footage, even before found footage, as more than one person has noted. I think you talk about as well in the book, you know, those early, like, you know, the Castle Otranto and others were presented first as, I found these letters in an old clock in Italy, and here I'm presenting them to you. And so, or the number of films, Texas Chainsaw and others, that have said, you know, this is a true story, et cetera, et cetera. And found footage just kind of moved that. And now we're moving into an era where it's in other kinds of mediums, where we're suddenly getting the podcast or the digital or the internet, things like Marble Hornets and the movement there. So I guess the other question I have, and maybe this will wrap up our time and we'll bring in the panel here. I guess I'm wondering about what seems to me maybe a trend, maybe it's not, so you'll tell me if it's not, of interest with found footage becoming the center of fictional narrative. So the example I'm thinking of, at least that jumps to my mind, is I think it was started as a podcast and then became a Netflix series called Archive 81 that was about someone seeking out footage. Yeah. And so I'm wondering if that's another way that the found footage lives, as getting embedded into other narratives about the forbiddenness of this found footage.
Definitely, yeah. I love Archive 81. I'm so sad that it got cancelled. It was so good. But I think that's another really interesting thing of maybe this is where found footage goes, is that kind of re-inclusion of older documentary evidence. So, you know, in Archive 81, it's these old, are they like high 8 videotapes that he's restoring? And you've got the VHS 94, VHS 99, which are kind of going back to that analog kind of look. And also, I mean, I'm thinking of things like cigarette burns, John Carpenter's cigarette burns, like that tradition of, oh, this is an old piece of media and also it's cursed.
Yes.
And yeah, I love that. And I love how, you know, even if found footage as a cycle, I think when I finished the book, I very much thought it was coming to an end, that cycle, because you had Blair Witch 2016 and it kind of seemed to be winding down. And then so when I finished my thesis, that's how I felt. And then as I was finishing the book, you suddenly got the new VHS films and the new Paranormal Activity film. And I thought, oh, maybe it's taking off again. But even if this second wave doesn't take off, I love that it's kind of found a home as part of other horror texts. So yeah, Archive 81 and things like that. I love how it's found a second life in those kind of things.
And it's interesting to me that it does kind of mirror probably one of the key aspects of a lot of the found footage, which is, as you've already expressed, that sense that I'm not supposed to see this. Right. And I thought that particularly when the Megan is missing, particularly disturbing scene was circulating on TikTok, I think for a lot of people looking at that, especially young people, it was not just that this is a horrifying thing, but it was like, I should not ever see this. Like, this is a sort of horrible thing, just as with 9/11, that moment when you look and you think, I should not see this. Like, this is not something that should be available to my view.
Definitely, yeah. And like Poughkeepsie tapes, you know, for a long time when that wasn't being released and it was kind of circulating on download websites, and there was a sense, I mean, I remember when I watched the Poughkeepsie tapes and I thought it's literally one of my favorite films, but there is this kind of griminess to it, especially when you don't buy the kind of bells and whistles Blu-ray and you've got this just dodgy little file on your computer that's, oh, that's the Poughkeepsie tapes. It feels kind of illicit and grimy. And you know, 9/11, but also connecting to the real death websites that I talk about a little bit. So that, sure, you know, that idea of you're going to log on to, I think it was Caitlin Moran, the journalist, who said, you know, she watched one of them and her instinct was to put a blanket over her computer because obviously clicking on this, she'd opened herself up to something. I think that's a really key thing of found footage as well, this idea that somehow it's so illicit and it's so you shouldn't have watched it, that maybe now you're on a list somewhere because you've watched the Poughkeepsie tapes. I mean, I have a feeling if there are these lists, I'm probably on all of them, but
you were definitely on. In fact, the FBI called earlier. I'm supposed to take you into custody here in a few minutes, but absolutely. Speaking of other people who should be taken into custody, let me now turn it over and invite our esteemed panel. I will introduce them in turn in alphabetical order, beginning with someone we've already talked a little bit about, Aislinn Clarke. Aislinn is a groundbreaking writer-director known for most notably the 2018 feature film we were just discussing, The Devil's Doorway, which was nominated for the Jury Prize, the Mullins Film Festival, and the Seattle International Film Festival. Also numerous shorts, including Eye Exam, which won the Venice Short Film Festival Award in 2020. She was recently on the Academy's Gold Fellowship, congratulations, and in 2020 directed an episode of Bite Size Halloween for Hulu, one of my favorite series. Love having a little 3-minute moment of horror just to enjoy. Aislinn Clarke, so welcome to the panel.
Hello, welcome, or thanks for welcoming me, I should say. Happy to be here.
Thank you for welcoming me now that we're in your home and you're in mine. That's great. Also joining us is Amy Nisa. Amy, hey, there's Amy. Hi, Amy, with the very cool filter on the Zoom we were discussing earlier. Amy is a PhD candidate at Northumbria University, working with the all-star panel there of Steve Jones and Johnny Walker. Her dissertation focuses on American found footage and technological agency, theorizing how the camera itself can be read as a non-human character. Her research interests more broadly include film theory, horror, technology, and power. So you are in the right place. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thrilled to have you. Also joining our panel is Cecilia Sayad. Cecilia.
Hello.
Bonjour. Lovely to have you. As a senior lecturer in film at the University of Kent and author of, among others, Ghost in the Image, Technology and Reality in the Horror Genre, one of my favorite books and articles on horror published in Screen and Cinema Journal. Indeed, her piece in Cinema Journal about found footage horror and the frame's undoing was given the award by none other than this august group as best journal article in 2017. She's also author of Performing Authorship and co-editor of Film Criticism in the Digital Age. Welcome to this digital age, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to discuss this fantastic book.
Thrilled to have you. Rounding out our amazing group of scholars and artists is none other than Pete Turner. Pete is a lecturer in film. Hi, Pete. And he also has his child. Is your child still with you, Pete?
No, thank God. She's just been taken away just in the nick of time. Couldn't have been better timing.
We were promised crying babies and pugs, and we haven't had either. So I feel a little disappointed. But Pete is no disappointment because he is lecturer in film and digital media production and subject coordinator in the School of Art at Oxford Brookes University. He is the author of the amazing found footage horror films, A Cognitive Approach from Rutledge, and the Devil's Advocate monograph on the Blair Witch Project. So we probably have a lot to talk about here, as well as numerous reviews and commentaries for popular magazines like Starburst. Amazing panel. Welcome. Lovely to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I wanted to throw open a question that Shellie and I have already talked a little bit about, but I'm curious folks' approach to it, which is one of the things that Shelley's book does a great job of talking about is the impact of other cultural moments, cultural events, history on the kind of development and the aesthetics of found footage. So maybe if I can, Cecilia, if I can start with you, what are your thoughts about the way that kind of cultural history helped to shape the way we look at found footage films?
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I wanted just to say before I answer the question that about Shelley's book, that I thought it was one of the most pleasurable and profound and insightful books I've read lately. And it's really so rigorous and so nicely written, Shellie. So many congratulations on that.
Thank you. That's really kind,
Especially
especially from you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So I think all forms of, one of the fascinating things with found footage horror, but with horror in general, I think is that the genre is in the avant-garde of how we express certain feelings and anxieties about the world. And I think that the other forms of cultural manifestations and technologies have influenced the found footage. First is in the visual fabric of the films, as Shellie explores really well. So from home movies to reality TV to social media, how this kind of language and aesthetics and types of framing as well have kind of being incorporated into the films, and how creatively the films approach these visual elements. But also I think how the films express our anxieties about these new technologies as well. So I think Shellie really explores really well how this reality comes to us through images coming from home movies and the images we capture with our phones, images we see we post on social media, through reality TV, and so on. So the world comes to us mediated by these images. So I think that's one thing, but also how our anxieties about the implications of this technology, what it does to our lives, and what it does to our perception of the world as well. It's something that these films articulate really well. And I think, Shellie's book explores really comprehensively and thoroughly. So
yeah, no, Amy, do you have thoughts on that? I know you're interested in technology and agency and found footage. So do you have some thoughts to extend there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with what Cecilia said. I couldn't have put it there myself. So yeah. So yeah, if you just pretend I said all of that, I agree with Cecilia about the idea of the new technologies and the fear of the new technologies. I think the nature of found footage is that with any new type of technology, there can be a found footage made. So there can, during COVID, with Zoom, we had hosts. You've got a new one on Netflix coming soon, I think. But I think there's just quite a lot out there, and it works really well because it can be quite cheaply made. That you can really any form of new technology. I think there can be a version of found footage on there. So I think that's what's really interesting, and then that opens up a new avenue, I think, for the new fears that come along with that technology. I think the camera technology moves so quickly now that I think, we were discussing earlier about how there was quite a gap between the Blair Witch and sort of the Paranormal Activity. Obviously, there were films made in that time, but there's been quite a steady increase since the late 2000s, and I don't think it's a coincidence that that's when camera technology has advanced and become quite easily accessible, and certain things like filters, that kind of thing. I'd be really intrigued. So this is going off the topic completely, but I'd be really interested in kind of where found footage could take us when we have such things like filters to change what's happening on screen, and I know that's been explored a little bit in Host, but I think there's just there's with every new format of technology a new kind of fear and a new creative outlet can be made.
Yes, I can say that Fitbit technology is a nightmare every time I walk upstairs. So that's quite a traumatic experience. Peter, Ashley, I'm particularly interested in your perspective as a filmmaker, as well as a great thinker, et cetera, et cetera. Are you thinking about broader cultural events, either the technology of film, or are you thinking about what's going on, things like 9/11 or et cetera? Is that in your head as you're writing and developing, or is that just kind of ends up osmosis into the product?
Sorry, was that for me?
It was. Sorry, Ash. Yes.
Oh, so I thought you said Peter at the start then.
Oh, no, sorry.
I think that, well, obviously The Devil's Doorway, for those of you who didn't see it, so it's set in 1960, and it's partly, not wholly, but partly shot on 16mm. So I was intentionally using the opposite of what we're talking about here. I was intentionally using that texture of that time and the technology of that time to create Something that felt very different to, it's a period found footage horror film, and I hadn't seen any others at that time that were like that. Partly that is because the particular thing that I was wanting to explore, which is the history of Magdalen laundries in Ireland, these institutions where women were kept against their will if they committed terrible sins like getting pregnant outside marriage. Wanting to explore that particular horror meant setting it in that time in order to really exploit when they were at the height of their, they existed in every community, people knew about them. I wanted to, go back to the heart of that. So that's why I chose to do it. I think it depends on what the horror is that you're exploring. So if you're exploring some very contemporary now, like with Host, if you're using this moment when everyone is on Zoom and there's a reason why everyone was on Zoom at that time because of the pandemic and everything, then that's why you use that format. I think it can be malleable in that sense, and you can choose different methods of shooting. The medium is the message, Marshall McLuhan quote, and I think that's really extremely true for found footage. I think that's so much the heart of found footage, that how we are shooting these films is so much a part of what they are about and why they work. Just to add a little bit onto that, I think there's this kind of compulsion as well that the more technology we have, the more we should use it. And sometimes it actually doesn't work. So for example, the drone cameras in the most recent Blair Witch Project, I didn't love that, I think it's not always a good thing to embrace the new technology, or it's just how you use it, I guess. But I think it's reflecting what the horror is that you're trying to communicate. If that answers the question.
Beautifully answered, of course. A fabulous answer. Pete, what are your thoughts about the sort of broader context, whether it's technology or culture, et cetera, and how that kind of shapes the emergence and then reception and shape of found footage?
I haven't got a huge amount to add here. I think I was sort of in the same boat as Shellie, and I think I loved Blair Witch Project, but for me, the Cloverfield and the 9/11 sort of similarities was where my interest in found footage kind of exploded. So, and I think Shelley's book just completely nails this whole idea of found footage dealing with trauma, but also dealing with these anxieties around technology. The only thing I would add is that I think the films also deal with the joys and the excitement around this new technology, and sort of just to slightly disagree with you about the drones. Like, for instance, I love that they brought drones into the new Blair Witch, and there's one of the VHS chapters which I think is from one of the guys who did Blair Witch with the GoPro on the helmet, and so I love it when they experiment with new technology. And the most recent found footage film I've watched actually is Deadstream. I don't know how many of you saw Deadstream, but the whole moving it into live streaming, and so I think it's also about the joys and the experimentation with these new technologies, and I don't think that should be kind of underestimated. But the last thing I want to say is actually that gap between Blair Witch and Cloverfield. There was, there is a few found footage films there, like Man Bites Dog and things. I think No, Man Bites Dog is even before Blair Witch, isn't it? But so it feels to me that Cloverfield really kind of showed, or I suppose 9/11, the event, kind of showed to people more than anything else before that people will film until they have death in their face. And I think for so many people, the problem with Blair Witch was, why are they still filming? Why are they still filming? And you hear it all the time still now, about found footage films. But I think 9/11 and, things like the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami and things, there's so many videos of people filming right up until they are dead, probably, or maybe not dead, but I mean, they should have put their camera down. So yeah, that's the only thing. Can
I just clarify one little thing? I wasn't trying to say that I'm against any kind of new technology being used. Apologies if I communicated that It's more that there's a compulsion to, sometimes it feels like there's a compulsion to use everything, and there's an eventual reality where we can see absolutely everything and it's all in HD, and it's like, I think it's just being selective and knowing how to use, it's manipulation via the medium, so it's about choosing the things, but certainly, yes, absolutely use new technology. I'm not saying we should all be using 16mm cameras, so apologies for giving you that impression.
I think we should stick with 16mm. Damn it, I feel like all this new technology.
Wouldn't it be lovely if we did though?
But I'm wondering, I mean, obviously all the answers sort of key on this idea very intelligently, that, the visual technology, and Peter's point's excellent, that I can't think of the number of found footage film that begin with someone going, oh, look, a new camera, this will be fun. And then you think, no, not for long, right? There is something about that joy. There's also something about the compulsion of the technology that makes us want, but I think, in some ways, to Aislinn's point, it also is still about the story. So I'm wondering if there's something beyond the technology, something about the way found footage shapes a story that has helped the genre endure, because it certainly lasted longer than I thought it would, back in 1999. So Amy, do you have thoughts about that? Is there something about the story or other folks have thoughts about what's helped the found footage story keep getting new for each generation?
I mean, I think for me, and this is, I guess, maybe quite specific, but I think currently there is a lot of, I guess, focus on conspiracy theories and what truth is, and whether there are multiple versions of the truth, and what other people, and I think the stories of found footage really go into that kind of point of what is the truth. And I think maybe there's something in the current moment and kind of the resurgence of found footage that is about trying to show maybe a side of something, events that maybe haven't been reported in the news, maybe events that might go against dominant narratives. So I think it's this idea, this play between sort of a mainstream normative narrative that you might get somewhere and then the real truth. And I think that's kind of the what found footage does best is playing in between there, and like what's actually true and what did happen, but what do other people believe happened, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Shellie, if that doesn't tie into our idea that found footage often seems forbidden because it's like the truth you're not supposed to know, like this secret truth that you're not supposed to see this, you're supposed to see this other thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the films I cover in the book, and which I forgot to say earlier when I was talking about my favorite ones, is The Conspiracy. So like perfectly ties in with Amy's point, and this whole idea of sorry, spoilers, but it is like over a decade old, so I feel like it's safe. This whole kind of narrative plays out and you think, okay, this is the truth because these people are trying to uncover this conspiracy, and then it gets to the end and something happens, and I won't ruin it, but it kind of makes you rethink everything that you've seen. Like, okay, well, who was controlling this documentary from the start then? Because I don't think it was these guys that I really liked and were seemingly good guys. I think maybe the bad guys may put this together. And I think that, we're in an era now of deep fakes and, post-truth. And I think found footage horror, it could, without even going into different formats, it could roll forward on that kind of concept for quite a while, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, because we are in an age where everything's possible and everything's being shown. Cecilia, what are your thoughts about the enduring popularity or endurance of the found footage?
No, what I was going to say is that I think you were talking about stories. I think we consume stories through social media now and through home videos as well. So I think one of the good things about found footage horror, but more specifically, what Shellie very aptly actually came up with a good term for films like Unfriended, which is social media horror. So many people trying to come up with a good term. I was going to use webcam horror in something I'm writing, but I like social media horror better. Is that we have to take into account that people now consume films or watch films on their laptops, on their phones. So the found footage horror, the social media horror, or this kind of, amateur footage kind of horror goes very well with this new way of watching films as well. So I think that helps it endure and makes it very, a perfect way a perfect material for films to be consumed in this way, watched in this way.
Yeah. So Peter, is this similar to, is part of the endurance of found footage then just our joy with new technology and our fear with new technology, or are there other ways that the found footage is kind of continually reinventing itself and finding new audiences?
Yeah, I mean, sorry if I say this response to every question, but Shellie kind of nails this in that there's the two sides to it. There's the keeping up with new technology. Found footage films are brilliant at doing that. They've gone through 16mm to kind of digi-handycams to camera phones and drones and dash cams and all these kind of new technologies. And then at the same time, they're incredible at keeping up with the most horrible things imaginable being captured on cameras. So I mean, gosh, Shellie, you were talking about your sort of like, you'll be on a list. Like after reading the book, the amount of things I googled like in the last few days is terrifying. I know, but I'm so fascinated to hear, there's these examples of these, guys that are killing an old man in the Ukraine, and I mean, it's been horrible reading, but like it found footage is the perfect medium to be, obviously it's the perfect medium to be dealing with the fact that we are all on our phone. We are all filming more than ever before in history. We are all becoming much more narcissistic, and I assume murderers and school shooters and serial killers are just like the rest of us, becoming more and more narcissistic, and found footage horror is addressing that constantly. And the final thing I'll say is that the fans that I engage with around found footage, I think, after maybe Blair Witch Project, there was this, no one can repeat that because we all get the joke now. We all get it. So there was kind of a nice long gap where it was like, well, you just can't repeat it. Now you talk a lot in the book about this call to play. And I think that's exactly what found footage fans, we all know all of these are fake now, but we enjoy the ruse so much. We enjoy pretending these are real. And I guess that's the same with all films, but found footage films allow us to do that in a more immersive, strong kind of way.
It feels a little less controlled. I've often thought about that. I, one of the reasons I always thought that Texas Chainsaw was the pound for pound best American horror film is because there are moments in watching that where it does feel like there's no one in charge of this film. Like, this has just completely gone insane. And found footage kind of takes that one step further and says, so I'm curious, for all of you, we've talked a lot about some of these titles, but what are the found footage film? What's the found footage film that just left that big impression on you? Aislinn, how about you? You're our filmmaker and have made an amazing found footage film. Was there a found footage film that you watched and said, oh, wow, that's something?
Yeah, there's been a few, but I'm going to be really basic just because it's the truth. I think the Blair Witch Project, and I think just kind of bouncing off what you were just saying, the impact that it had on me. I didn't know, or I didn't think that it was real because my mother had been to see it at cinema, and she came home, she said, I didn't believe that for a minute. That wasn't real. So when I finally saw it on a grainy VHS tape that was taped from something else, and it only makes the experience better, as I think you said, Shellie, at some point, that like the distance that's created, it only makes it better. It was the sense of it being, there's this primal kind of feeling with found footage where it feels unmoored from any, there's no sense of, you don't have any, as an audience member, you don't feel any right of expectation, where you go to see any other Hollywood horror film and you think there are going to be these certain kind of tentpole moments. Even subconsciously, you understand this. This narrative has a hero, and there is going to be a 3-act structure, and at the end, he's going to win. And there's a certain comfort blanket that comes with this, even in a really scary horror movie, where a found footage film, you think these people could do absolutely anything. They're not shooting this well. They don't care about any of the stuff that you're supposed to care about, and it's totally uncontrolled, unmoored, which means anything could happen. And it's that kind of primal fear of absolutely having no sense of where this is going to go, and willing them to turn the camera just a little bit that way, or oh my goodness, no, you have to point it down. It's that feeling of having no control that makes it so scary. And that film still scares me. I've seen it a million times, but it'd have to be that one.
And it does feel so raw. And I always say to people, I think even now watching it, knowing what it is and how it was made, I would say at the time I knew just because I had read about it being bought at Sundance. So I kind of had read the backstory. Probably only the people that read Variety knew. The only people, I will tell one quick story, the only folks who did know that this was not a real story were people in St. Louis, Missouri, because Heather was the popular Shake Shack girl. So it was actually White Castle. White Castle is a kind of popular burger joint that's a Midwest. And she was the spokesperson. She was like the face of White Castle. And people said, she didn't go to school. She's not a film student. She's the actress who does the White Castle commercials. So that city didn't get it, but everybody else got a sense of it. Other folks, I mean, Blair Witch clearly is a big one. Are there other people who would nominate a different film as being one that you said, wow, that's really something? Amy, how about you?
So I feel like, I don't know if this is going to be unpopular, but unlike everybody else on the panel, I agree with some of the comments in the meeting where people have said found footage makes them feel quite nauseous. So I'm one of these people that my introduction to found footage was Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. And I remember the first time I watched them, because my sense of balance is very off, I felt really nauseous and I could not enjoy it. And every time I've gone to see a 3D film, it makes me feel sick. So there's some kind of effective thing, even though I now study found footage horror, that put me off initially. So, you know, when the whole Blair Witch was a massive thing, that was not my introduction. My introduction was, curiously, Megan is Missing when it came out in 2011. So that was very, very late. And there's something about that film for me. I mean, the director went on to direct American Horror Story, but there's something about that mixes a reality TV camp sort of aesthetic, and it encompasses a kind of sort of knowing reality TV crime kind of thing that I really, really liked. And then that got me back into found footage. And I remember looking up Paranormal Activity and then realizing that the directors also directed the documentary Catfish, and then that's a reality TV series. And then I got interested in all the paranormal reality TV type films like Grave Encounters and that kind of thing. So my introduction's actually through a reality TV lens, because the aesthetic, I think for a lot of people, it can be quite off-putting, because you maybe assume it's all the same and it's going to make you feel sick. But yeah, I got into it a roundabout way, where I came in quite near the end and then worked my way back to kind of appreciate it.
And that's a perfectly good route to take. How about you, Cecilia? What are your thoughts? What was the film that had a big impression on you?
Paranormal Activity, yeah, without a doubt. But that's, I mean, for a personal reason, because I like stories about ghosts and demons more. You know, that's my favorite kind of horror. And the found footage is one of my favorite horror cycles or subgenres. So I think that was the perfect, you know, marriage between the topic and the format. Blair Witch, I went to see, hearing that when it was released, hearing that it was a documentary. But after I watched it, I looked at my friend and said, "Yeah, it's not. It's a fake documentary. That's not real." And I wasn't aware at the time of the, you know, fake making offs and all that. So it was just like the information that it was possibly real, and then watching and saying no. But I love it, I think. But it was more the concept than the topic. The one that really got to me was Paranormal Activity, which I found was terrifying. And then I liked very much how the series developed up until the 4th installment, because I liked the incorporation of new technologies, and I thought that's really creative and effective. So yeah, Paranormal Activity is my favorite of all times.
Okay, Peter, how about you? What would you nominate as the Hall of Fame of found footage?
Well, so I love Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, and I kind of think they deserve to be up there and talked about and all that sort of thing. But for me, and this is probably slightly controversial, because I know I was waiting the whole way through the book for Shellie to mention Zero Day, and you mention it once in the conclusion, but you don't consider it a horror movie, and I get that. But to me, it's absolutely a horror movie, because what can be more horrific than school shootings? So I don't want to get into a sort of genre conventions discussion, but for me, Zero Day is the one that, because it was like 2003. I cannot believe they got it made, because Columbine was probably still so raw. If Columbine and 9/11 were like the two things that completely changed the world for me as a teenager in those days. And Zero Day, is like based on the basement tapes or whatever, these tapes that the killers had made, and I just think it's brilliantly acted, like perfectly acted, and it just comes across as the tapes that those killers would have made, and it's mind-boggling to me how good it is, and how scary and chilling, and also kind of disgusting that it's been made. But this goes back to Shelley's sort of points around trauma and whether we should, you were saying about if we worry too much about not depicting trauma events, there'll be a kind of silence around them and all that sort of thing. And I don't think there should be a silence around them, but I hope no one who had any involvement with Columbine ever sees Zero Day, because it would be horrendous for them. But the rest of us, I think it's an eye-opening, brilliant film. So that's the one I would shout out.
No, and it's one of the great points that Shellie makes in the book that I think is very important, is that relationship to trauma is part that, trauma is this thing that it's hard to speak. At least that's Kathy Kruth's sort of famous line. It's the unspeakable. It's the language that can't be spoken. And so your normal film has that kind of filmmaker speaking that language. As Aislinn said, you sort of know, okay, I expect this, the 3-act structure, this is going to move through it. Found footage doesn't feel like that. It feels raw and fragmented, which is very much like trauma. So it's my last question for this distinguished, amazing panel here celebrating Shelley's new book. I'd actually start with Shellie with this question. What is your one hot take, unpopular opinion? What's the thing about a found footage film or found footage in general you are embarrassed to say in front of a vast gathering of amazing scholars? So embarrass yourself now and give us your unpopular take. Shellie, give us yours.
I love a jump scare, and I think that found footage horror jump scares are among the most well-constructed, well-timed, effective jump scares ever. And I think it's to do with that whole, like a couple of us have said it tonight, that please just move the camera that way a little bit, please. And you're kind of in the limits of the frame. The film Incantation that was released on Netflix, I think it was like last year. There's a bit in that film where I don't know if anyone's seen it, but they're traveling in a car, and there's something, and it's kind of up on this pole up here, and the character's very slowly panning the camera up, and I've never felt so intensely worried about what was going to happen, not only to the character, but like to the drink I was holding, to my dog who was going to get launched into the TV in my life. So yeah, my unpopular general horror take is I love a jump scare, and found footage horror does jump scares the best.
Well, since we're celebrating you, we will still accept and love you, so that in spite of that horrible hot take, I will not call on people. I don't want to out you here, but other folks who have an opinion they're willing to bravely share in this august body.
That probably wouldn't be welcome anywhere else. I don't know, maybe not even here, but I think that if Hitchcock had been making films in like the 90s, I think he would have loved found footage. I think he would have liked that as a medium. I mean, it's a natural medium for the voyeur, and that was his primary thing. The emotional control it gives you over the audience, which is also something that was like a big Hitchcock. I don't know. That's what I think. I don't know if any Hitchcock academics would agree with me on that, but I feel that he would have liked it.
I just thought
Psycho would have been an amazing found footage horror film.
On that, I just thought of an even better unpopular take that I have now. Can I have two?
You can. It's your party. You can have. You can cry if you want to.
By what Ash said. So, we were talking about found footage horror being kind of very popular and also kind of very maligned in a lot of academic work. it is the natural descendant of the golden age of horror in the 70s, that, you know, based on a real story, Last House on the Left, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that kind of documentary evidence within, it's the natural. And it's interesting to me how a lot of people, I'm not going to name names and shame, a lot of people have sort of set those two things up as opposite. You know, you've got this golden age of 1970s horror and found footage horror and torture horror and remakes are everything that's wrong with the horror genre. Found footage horror is the natural progression. I've said it.
I think that was me that you're saying, and you're perfectly right.
No,
Yes,
it wasn't
I did
you.
say it, and
I'm
sure it was. I'm sure I must have said it somewhere.
I feel lighter having said that.
It's like you know, there's 12 steps, and just admit there's a higher power, and you can all get past your bad opinions. I was taken with Ash. I gotta say, I have a thesis that someone needs to develop Rear Window as the precursor to found footage. Right? Isn't that the natural narrative movement from Rear Window to just seeing Rear Window from the perspective of Jimmy Stewart's camera there? Since we're all letting it all hang out, it's like a good group therapy session. We're going to hug it out here in a second, folks, because that's what Americans do.
I mean, my previous opinion was very probably controversial anyway, so that was unpopular. So I don't have anything more unpopular than that. This isn't very academic, but I feel like one of the reasons that I quite like found footage and the paranormal activities is I don't really like any of the characters in Paranormal Activity, so I enjoy watching them getting killed. And I don't know if that's quite, you know, that's maybe a very unpopular opinion, but I've had to watch the film a lot of times for my thesis, and the main guy, Mika, I just relish every time he's murdered. So that's, so that's maybe he does deserve, I feel like he deserves it. But yeah,
Stella Gaynor seconds you saying Mika deserved it. So I think we can all agree. Definitely. Any other hot takes before we turn this over to the amazing audience?
I will say, I don't think this is much of it's certainly not, I don't know. One of the things that I was so impressed again with Shelley's book is how much she loves found footage. And I will say that after writing my book, I was sick to friggin' death of found footage, and I never wanted to see it. Well, I wanted a really long break from found footage, and I still think that they are some of the best films I've ever seen, and they are also some of the worst films I've ever seen. I have watched some utter crap where for the last half an hour you are just stuck in one person's point of view, and they're just running around in the dark. And it's just half an hour of one person running around the dark. You can't see anything. You don't get to see their face, how they're feeling. You just hear breathing for half an hour, and it's just utter crap, I would argue. I'm sorry to say. So I'm sick of point of view shots as well. And that's why I love Deadstream so much, because he's constantly got a camera looking back at him and a camera doing his point of view. So you're constantly getting to see him. And that's what, for me, you know, going back to Blair Witch, Heather apologizing to the camera is one of the greatest moments in like cinema history, I would argue, and so I think found footage filmmakers need to remember, show your characters, turn the camera around sometimes, because if you're just doing point of view shots for half an hour, it's friggin' boring. Sorry. Yep. I haven't said the F word because I'm saving it for Shelley whenever she wants to.
Yep. Shelley, we're going to both allow you to say the F word, and we're going to ask you one final question before we turn it over to our amazing audience with their questions. When you finish this book, were you sick to death of fucking found footage? There you go. I'll drop the first F-bomb. I'm an American. It's what we do. Or did you dive back in? And if you were sick of them, what did you use to cleanse your palate? So, Shelley, the question to you.
When I finished it, I thought, I never want to watch another found footage movie again. I'm sick to death. No. But I went back to The Sacrament, because I mean, anyone who's ever spoken to me for more than 5 minutes knows that I'm obsessed with that film. So yeah, that was my one that I went back and palate cleanse with. And yeah, I still fucking love found footage horror.
There you go. Now we're going to be in trouble with the BBC. Good job. So we're now at the time where we'll open it up to the questions. I will say people can feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'm happy to ask them. Or if you just want to not hear your question in a horrible nasally American accent, you are welcome to raise your hand and ask the questions yourself. And we have some questions already popping up. Wow, you guys are really stinking quick. Kate, do you want me to ask this or would you like to ask? Oh, happy for me to do it. So I am happy to parrot Kate Egan. I do not have her melodious voice, but you'll have to listen to me. She says, I remember my friend Nia, who co-organizes Abattoir Horror Festival, mentioning that they have always, over the last 10 years, received a lot of found footage films from new filmmakers. What do you think about found footage? Why does it remain popular with young and emerging filmmakers? So Shellie or Ash, folks who have a thought about that?
I think its number one thing is because it is so accessible. You know, it's cheap and easy. Anyone can technically pick up their phone right now and make a found footage horror film. But this is also, it's kind of like, you know, the way you get a piano in an airport and it's anybody can use it, it's free. That means some kid is going to come over and just bang on the keys. It also means that somebody's going to come over and they can actually play Mahler, you know. So just because it's accessible and practically free, this means that there's a lot of content that's bad. It also means, it doesn't mean that that means that the subgenre is bad. So I think just to spiral back to the actual question, sorry, the reason that you have a lot of stuff from younger filmmakers that's found footage is because they can make it without needing to have finance. They can make it without needing to get a special camera or editing equipment. They can make it without needing, you know, all kinds of special effects. It can look a bit hokey and it can still really work, you know. So I think that's the main reason.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And you know, and building on that, they don't need to have stars in it. If anything, that would be a bad thing for it to have stars, or not a bad thing, but that would kind of lessen the kind
like
of
Heather in the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just, yeah, agree with everything that Ash said. You know, it's I've picked myself up a couple of times with saying, oh, it's an easy subgenre to, and it's not. It's, yes, it is easy to replicate some of its characteristics, but it's hard to make a good found footage film. And I think, you know, a lot of people criticize it for being artless. A lot of effort goes into making something look like it took no effort at all.
Yeah. So we have another question from James Rendell, the nicest human being on the planet. So I'm a big fan of James. He asks, do you find a difference between those found footage media that employ contemporary or new media forms for the time of the release, like Blair Witch or Host, compared to those films, I guess like Aislinn's, that use found footage in a retro or that use dead media? So do you think that's part of a difference, Shellie and or others on the panel?
I mean, I think I wrote something recently that's going to be published soon about, and we kind of touched on it earlier, like found footage horror as kind of a living archive of our relationship with technology. I think there is a difference. I guess it's that thing of you know, when you get like the retro horror films, like stuff that's meant, like House of the Devil is meant to look kind of like it's a lost 80s film. What I think is going to be interesting is in 10-20 years time, when we look back at things like VHS 99 and go, right, so this come out in 2020 or 2021, but it's made to look like it's from 1999. So how do we theorize around this? How do we kind of write around this? I think that's going to be really interesting. I think there is a difference, but all under the same glorious umbrella of found footage horror. I don't know if everyone else feels differently, and I was just like, no, this is how I feel, but I'm probably wrong.
Well, you wrote the book, so I mean, you get the final say. Do other people have thoughts about? I mean, Ash, I'm curious for your perspective as a person who kind of decided to use a sort of retro found footage approach. Do you think that's different than folks who are saying, "Oh, wow, I'm going to use the newest technology"? Like now in the States, the new sort of screen social media film Missing has been sort of in the top 10, making a lot of waves here, similar to Searching and others. I mean, do you think that's a difference? Is that going to change the way we look at these films?
I don't know. I think at the end of the day, all these films are trying to essentially do the same thing. And that is tap into that kind of primal kind of terror of not having any control or feeling that this whole thing is unmoored. In terms of how we talk about them, I think Shellie raises a really interesting point, that it's going to be interesting to see how we talk about these films in 20 years time, you know, if they're set in different periods and so on. I don't know if I'm answering the question for you there at all, but I think, you know, if something like Host, which was using the kind of new interface of screen that we were all getting used to, and my film, which was 16mm, trying to look like a Maisels Brothers documentary of the time, they're very different, but they're essentially trying to pull the same trick.
Other folks on the panel, thoughts about this kind of anachronistic blurring of temporality as we get a 2018 film that looks like 16mm through the 60s, and we get contemporary films that look like, you know, they're from right now? Is that temporal squashing going to have an impact on the way we think of found footage maybe later down the line?
I don't know. I find it fascinating. Actually, I would like, Shellie, if you're writing about that, I would like to read it. I find it fascinating, but I think it has to do, I mean, it's something similar that happened with digitizing old films, isn't it? So I think it's quite a natural phenomenon and development of things. Like new media is always trying to, I think there's a term that's used for that, is remediate. So kind of, you know, like bring back old media in a new way. So yeah, I think so that's part of the same phenomenon.
We have a question from Adam Heron, who asks, any thoughts and feelings on the Backrooms series that's been making waves on YouTube and beyond? Found footage production values seem much better when I was a teenager, ha ha ha. But have anybody seen these Backrooms, these little short videos of sort of like virtual reality, strange, creepy spaces? Any thoughts of that and its relationship to found footage? Shellie, do you have thoughts on that?
I love Backrooms. It genuinely is so creepy. I adore it. I really, yeah. It's not the one that I would watch on my own in the dark at night on a laptop. It's a broad daylight watch for me.
I was can I just jump in there? What's really interesting, I find them really creepy as well, Shellie. Sorry, just knocking things over. I find them really creepy, but my 9-year-old nephew watches Backrooms. And is totally fine with them, and my 14-year-old will watch really creepy things that I find really unsettling because of the VR and because of the computer generated animation that I find really uncanny, and I find them absolutely terrifying as somebody who watches horror films for a living. And there are these kids that they do not find it as scary, and I think there's something quite interesting there. That is there kind of a different language of horror that is now being made on YouTube, and if you're not on YouTube and not watching the same things as these kids are, that maybe the language is somehow over your head or you don't understand it.
Yeah.
I'll move on to the next question from Aaron McMullen, who wants to know about the distinction between found footage and mockumentary. And he asks, if Spinal Tap was presented without the documentary frame, would it be found footage? And similarly, what do you do with a thing like Lake Mungo, or for that matter, Savage Land, that are framed as documentary, even though they're using found footage? So Shellie, how do you make a distinction between found footage and mockumentary, or is there one?
I think for me, like with Spinal Tap and things like that, it's the mock part of it, like what, because I never kind of equate mock with, oh, you know, it's mocking up this look. I take it as it's making fun of it. And like with found footage horror, like it's not making fun of anything. It's kind of pointing out the line between reality and fiction, or it's pointing out the kind of the constructed nature, like with Great Encounters and things like that, you know, the constructed nature of reality television. It's not mocking it, it's not poking fun at it, it's kind of drawing your attention to it. So that would be the distinction that I would make. I mean, like Mungo, Savage Land, Poughkeepsie tapes, I think that true crime framing can definitely be part of the found footage horror subgenre, particularly with, you know, with all of those films. There is also found footage, quite literally in Lake Mungo, found footage within them. So yeah, that would be my kind of line that I would draw.
So Craig Ian Mann, my main man, asks, as I'm able to ask his question, he's always been interested in the debate and was wondering what you all think about what is the first found footage film. So what gets credit for being the first found footage film?
I don't think it's the first, but one that I think is overlooked is Punishment Park.
Punishment Park. Yep. Other folks. I mean, the last broadcast, which was a little bit before Blair Witch, which often gets kind of overlooked.
Cannibal Holocaust comes up a lot in these conversations.
Yeah, Haxan from the 1920s.
I often think of the McPherson tapes, which I remember seeing in early online, which was kind of, again, a very early, very crude found footage, but was kind of out there first. And another one that often kind of just gets dropped out. Cecilia, how about you?
No, I was going to say it's a bit of a stretch, but the Mondokane films, I don't know if you know about those, which are, it's kind of snuff. It's like scenes of horrible killings and torture from all over the world. It was an Italian series. So, some of the things there could be seen as being part of horror, or maybe torture porn or snuff. And I think, the snuff is a kind of genre that is somehow very closely connected to the found footage.
Other thoughts? So our next question comes from Laura Mee, the amazing Laura Mee. There's a question for Shellie and anybody else who has thoughts. Given we can see found footage's use of technology as a kind of marker of its cultural moment, is there also something about using past technologies that's ephemeral or haunting and therefore lends itself to horror? Is there something about those past forms of media that are in and of themselves kind of haunting?
I think, me and Laura are kind of working on a new research project at the minute about dead media sort of coming back into the horror genre. I think there's something with certain things like 16mm, 8mm, there's something spooky about the way that they look. So I'm thinking about like in Sinister, why has Bagul got stuck at 8mm? Because it looks spooky. So yeah, I do think there's something quite haunting about the way older media forms look.
Yeah, I thought that in that Archive 81, which we were talking about, it was something about those melted, rotted, like little video cassettes that you just thought there's something. The minute you saw those cassettes, you thought, don't fix those. Those are bad. Leave those there. Or for that matter, in the Blair Witch, the early website that showed you the canisters of film in the dirt, and again that kind of texture or feel. So I guess the last question would be, for me, it would be, what's the future of found footage? I mean, are we going to keep having 20 years from now? Will there be a new amazing Shellie McMurdo book, Blood on the Lens Part 2, the next 20 years, where we'll be talking about a whole new generation of found footage? And if so, how will it look different? Any thoughts, Shellie? Predict the future.
I think what Amy said earlier kind of summed it up perfectly. As each time we get a new kind of technology or a new kind of social media app or something like that, that's where it's going to go. I mean, we've had the, first Snapchat movie in 2016. We had, Unfriended and all that with Skype. We had Host with Zoom. I think so long as people are inventing new technologies, that's where found footage horror will go.
Yeah, I think even if they didn't, I think there's still something about it, I don't use TikTok a huge amount, but I do use it some, and pretty much every time I go on, it's probably the algorithm too, but I see some viral TikTok that is essentially a found footage horror film that someone has made in their house, and they'll tell you that it's real, and maybe it is, but it's the same thing. I think we are videoing things, recording things that happen around us more and more all the time, and it looks like that trend's going to continue. Maybe it'll fall off, but as long as we have that trend continuing, people are going to keep doing this, because there is something that's primal and kind of immediate about it and affecting. When Blair Witch came out and everyone was like, oh, that wasn't really they faked it, it wasn't true. I remember thinking they'll never do that again. I think a lot of people thought they're never going to be able to do that again. It's a one-time thing. But then Paranormal Activity came out, big, huge splash again. And it's like, actually, people are happy to say, I know you're tricking me, but I'm into it anyway. So I think that will continue. Personally, I think it will.
Well, let me thank our amazing panelists, Aislinn, Peter, Cecilia, and Amy, for coming to celebrate this book. And of course, thank you to Shellie for writing it. A final plug to say, go out, get this book, assign it to your students. They're going to find this amazing. It opens up not only found footage, but bigger questions about trauma and cultural history and horror. So thank you, Shellie, and thank you all for joining us in this celebration of Blood on the Lens.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Congratulations, Shellie.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our fantastic panelists, and thank you to Kendall for fantastic and very charismatic sharing.